India just humiliated Britain on the world stage, and the fallout is only beginning. Hours ago, Prime Minister Narendra Modi blocked a British government delegation from entering India, visas revoked, meetings cancelled, diplomatic channels slammed shut. The reason? UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer accused India of sliding toward authoritarianism in a speech that India says crossed every line. Within minutes, India's foreign ministry issued a statement that shook Westminster to its core. India will not be lectured by those who still carry the shadow of empire. If you want to see how this crisis could reshape global power, hit subscribe now. Because what happens next will shock you. Inside Downing Street, panic. Phones ringing non-stop, aides scrambling. Foreign Secretary David Lammy called it unprecedented. Former diplomats are calling it a catastrophe. But here's what makes this different. This wasn't a diplomatic miscalculation. It was a calculated message. For decades, Britain and India maintained a polite facade, smiles masking old colonial wounds. Tonight, that facade shattered. Starmer's speech, delivered just 48 hours ago, accused India of silencing dissent and weakening democracy. He wanted to sound principled. Instead, he sounded imperial. Indian media exploded. Anchors called it British arrogance dressed as virtue. Social media across Asia erupted. By dawn, Modi's cabinet convened an emergency session. Their decision was swift and brutal. Britain's delegation would not be allowed entry. Then came the leak. An internal Labour memo surfaced online suggesting Starmer's team planned to pressure India on trade reforms using moral leverage. The timing was devastating. Indian newspapers ran it as front-page news. Labour's colonial tactics exposed. The memo confirmed what Modi's supporters suspected. Britain wasn't just criticising India, it was trying to interfere in its politics. Overnight, India's parliament roared with outrage. One MP called it foreign interference disguised as virtue. In Britain, even Starmer's own party started asking, why did we pick this fight? Conservative MPs smelled blood. Rishi Sunak warned of serious consequences for Britain's standing. Nigel Farage went on air calling Starmer a colonial preacher in a suit. Then the economic bomb started dropping. India suspended negotiations on a £28 billion trade deal. 3 years of work gone. British exporters went into panic mode. The pound dipped against the rupee. CEOs of major UK companies began demanding immediate damage control. But there was no damage control. Because the damage was intentional. India wasn't just retaliating, it was sending a message to the entire world. The era of British moral superiority is over and the world was watching. France, one of Britain's closest allies, held a joint press conference with India. The French foreign minister called India the world's most indispensable democratic power, a phrase historically reserved for the UK. The symbolism was impossible to miss. France was picking sides, and it wasn't Britain's. By midweek, the crisis escalated beyond anyone's worst fears. India announced a sweeping review of all British defence cooperation agreements, training programmes suspended, intelligence exchanges frozen, joint cyber operations halted. Former military officials called it the most serious diplomatic rupture since the Suez crisis. Then came the raid. India's government announced new restrictions on British-funded NGOs operating in India, accusing them of spreading political propaganda under humanitarian disguise. So overnight, dozens of British charity offices were raided, staff questioned, accounts frozen. London was stunned. This wasn't a diplomatic spat anymore, it was a power play. Inside Westminster, the atmosphere turned toxic. Leaked conversations revealed cabinet members screaming at each other. "We can't win this," one senior aide admitted. "Every word we say makes it worse." Starmer tried to hold the line in a late-night interview. His voice trembled. "We must stand for values, even when it costs us." But viewers could hear the desperation. The story was slipping away from him. Then the bombshell. A senior Labour strategist resigned, live on television. His statement was brutal. "This crisis was avoidable. We warned the Prime Minister repeatedly. He ignored every voice except his own." The resignation shattered any remaining illusion of unity. Public confidence in Starmer's foreign policy collapsed to its lowest level ever. Headlines screamed, "Starmer's India gamble backfires." Britain isolated on global stage. Even Labour loyalists began asking, did we go too far? Protests erupted outside Parliament. Some waved signs reading, "Peace with India now." Others demanded Starmer step down. Police formed barriers as tensions rose. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Behind palace walls, King Charles was reportedly furious. Not at Modi, but at his own government. Sources say the monarch reached out to Modi privately, urging calm, warning that this could damage historic bonds between nations. But if the king hoped for restraint, he would be disappointed, because just as Westminster prepared to de-escalate, India announced its final move. Britain had been formally downgraded to a non-priority partner in India's strategic framework. For the first time in modern diplomatic history, Britain had been deliberately sidelined by a nation it once ruled. A classified intelligence report leaked to the press predicted Britain's global influence could shrink by 30% if India redirected partnerships toward Europe and East Asia markets wobbled. The pound dipped again. Inside Parliament, Conservative MPs openly called for Starmer's resignation. Then the most shocking development of all, at Kensington Palace, Prince William received an envoy from the Prime Minister's office. The message was simple. Starmer needed royal backing to weather the crisis. William's response was ice cold. "You can tell the Prime Minister that the Crown will not be pressured. Not today. Not ever." The envoy left, clutching the sealed document like it was radioactive. Inside the palace, aides whispered, "If Starmer tries to force this, he'll trigger a crisis he cannot control." By evening, Buckingham Palace issued a terse statement. The king has been informed he is preparing a formal response. Translation: the monarchy was drawing a line in the sand. Across the world, the narrative had flipped completely. In Washington, diplomats called it the London isolation crisis. In Brussels, analysts described it as the day Britain lost its diplomatic mask. In New Delhi, the mood was triumphant. Parliament erupted in applause as one minister declared, "For centuries, London dictated terms to India. Now India dictates to London." The applause was deafening. India's media framed it as justice, a historic reversal of power. Commentators spoke of a second independence, a decolonisation of diplomacy. Meanwhile, Britain's streets stirred with unrest. Protesters carried both Indian and British flags. Some chanted for peace. Others demanded Starmer's resignation. The air was electric, heavy with the sense that something historic was breaking apart not just a diplomatic bond, but a nation's sense of authority. Inside Number 10, Starmer stood alone at his office window, staring out over Westminster. The streets below glowed with blue sirens and protest chants. A single question burned in his mind and in the mind of the entire nation. Had Britain just witnessed the moment it
in
stopped
the biggest
being a world
democratic
power,
exercise
or was this the
in the
wake-up
history
call it needed
of
to find its soul again? Because here's the brutal truth. Starmer walked into this crisis thinking Britain still held the moral high ground, that its colonial past was ancient history, that the world would listen when London spoke. He was wrong. At 9 p.m. Indian Standard Time, India's Ministry of External Affairs announced a live address to the nation. Every newsroom on earth held its breath. Every diplomatic channel fell silent. Every British official, from the Foreign Secretary down to junior aides, waited with dread. What India said next would either begin the path to repair or plunge the two nations into an unprecedented freeze that could last decades. As the broadcast countdown began, Starmer stood frozen, staring at the television screen. The clock struck 9. The screen
in the
faded
biggest
to
democratic
black.
exercise
Then the emblem of India
in the
appeared.
history
A single
of
voice began to speak, and the world leaned in. This is the biggest UK-India crisis in modern history, and it's far from over. Who do you think was right, Starmer or Modi? Drop your take in the comments and subscribe now, because what India announced next will change everything.